Welcome back to the Alexander Schmid podcast, episode 48, contemporary commentary 001 on Westworld season 2, episode 1 with first-time call-in person with first-time guest, Mr. Daniel Babcock. Can you hear me, Daniel?
I can hear you now.
Oh, wow! Oh, thank the heavens. This is the fourth time we have attempted this, and wow, I mean, how apropos that we be talking about Westworld and having issues with technology today. And one thing I should say before I even get into introducing Mr. Babcock appropriately, as I should, is that that we want to do this segment. We want to do the segment on Mondays, and of course there will be spoilers after Westworld. So Westworld will be viewed or capable to be viewed at 9 p.m. on HBO or HBO Go.
That is Eastern or real time, by the way.
Eastern or real time, right? I get to see it a little bit earlier being in San Diego. And so, well, before I talk a little bit about Westworld, I should say a little bit about you. I first met Mr. Babcock here, Mr. Daniel. I'll probably call him Mr. Babcock because we met at the same program, St. John's, for a graduate degree, a master's degree in liberal arts, and I think we met just about 7 years ago. 7 years ago now. Is that right?
Yeah, just over 7 years ago last January. Wow, time flies.
Time really does fly. And it's funny because you were already a teacher then, and you were taking the master's degree, and I had no idea what it was I was going to do, and it turns out now that I happen to be a teacher and low scale radio personality too, low volume. Well, I'm really happy. I'm really happy that you agreed to come on here, Mr. Babcock. And so you come from the same tradition as, at least from the same graduate program as the other two people we've had on this program now, Mr. Wesley Shantz and Miss Sarah Miller, and maybe we can get three of us or all four of us together and do some sort of seminar at some point.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be good fun. And so something that we always shared is not only a love for the great books, and of course you're a teacher at a Catholic school in the Midwest now, after having been a teacher at just a public school in Baltimore, right?
Correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, and so you're getting back to your Catholic roots in Michigan, and in fact, you're in Detroit, aren't you?
The school's University of Detroit Jesuit. It's in the north side of the city.
All right, well, that's very fantastic that you're back in your hometown, and what a town to be back in.
I do love it here.
Well, I think that's what it's going to take to make that a thriving sort of place again. So, it's good that you are a good person who love a good place and will hopefully help to infuse it with more good. It can be sort of like the opposite of what Westworld has become.
Which is sort of a no place, right?
Yeah, like an utopia, but a negative.
Exactly.
Utopia, right? Exactly, because it's and just sort of jump in, and I suppose we should say we're not just going to summarize the episodes here. You can watch them yourselves, but we'll throw some analysis out and provide that which we do provide, which will be some classical connections and just some personal and psychological and interesting connections. And that's the sort of thing that we do here. And what was striking to me was when the narrative creator in the care of Maeve, when he got to the control room, effectively the brain of Westworld, and he said no one's in charge.
Yeah,
man, those dogs are really going.
You can hear my. Hold on, let me try to quiet her down for a moment. Hold on. Sorry, I apologize.
It's okay. It's our first time doing this sort of thing. And, we ran into technical issues. We ran into a dog incessantly barking sort of issue. We have only up to go from here.
Yeah, right. Can't get worse.
Right. And so we were talking about the control center of Westworld now being unmanned, and it's sort of both literally and metaphorically unmanned now, right? Not only were all of the technicians who oversaw the running of the park at the beginning of the season 2, episode 1, dead and even almost sprawled out bloody on the map.
Yeah.
But also Anthony Hopkins' character, the sort of God the Father figure alongside Arnold, he too is dead, the sort of spiritual guide or the great storyteller, the second great storyteller, if you take the Man in Black's opinion of Arnold, as Arnold being the supreme storyteller, seriously, which I think is going to be proved wrong in this episode, or excuse me, in this season called The Door rather than The Maze, especially because remember Dr. Robert Ford saying that, well, to the Man in Black during this episode, that you're done with Arnold's game. You found the center of the maze, but now you have to find the door. Now you have to find your way out. You have to find your way through my game, which will find you. And then he actually kills the avatar of the young Robert Ford, saying, I don't need you anymore, suggesting to me kind of what our modern situation is, without a sort of anthropomorphized God the Father figure, where we more distribute our stories, as it were, as people. I'm making a connection between the show and our contemporary situation, as if we do not feel the same guiding force as a people that has a figure in that way, who provides a story within which each person plays.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah. So doesn't the young Robert Ford host say something like, so he says a few things. Obviously, they're all sort of cryptic, but one is the one that comes to mind most is the game ends where you begin and begins where you end. And
yes.
then, but I feel like he says something right before that, something about the game is inside you, or is that maybe something someone says to Dolores in season 1? I can't quite recall.
Well, I mean, certainly Dolores had to look inside herself to find that her image of God, like Dante's image of God, was not from the opposing sex, was not from some figure that was beyond her. Just as Dante has Beatrice, so does Dolores have Arnold at first.
Right.
But she finally visualizes herself. She sees her in the future, that will draw her along her possibilities, her potentialities into actualities. She sees who she can become.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, it's called her what? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say it's called her voice, right? They said like I mean it's in the preview for this episode. I was just watching. It's like the voice you need to hear is your own. Essentially, is the idea. Like
that's right. That's right. And we often as educators, and I think as writers too, hear so much about finding one's own voice, which I think is predicated on the idea of the logos and free speech, but also on the idea of consciousness. You find out who it is that you actually are and can make your own conscious and free choices to embody who it is you wish or will become by knowing precisely who it is you are. And so it strikes me as sort of Jungian in that it's sort of individuation, or the idea of individuation, even for a once android, now conscious being, is to become conscious of what it is and where it exists within its own story. And to become, like sort of John P. says, a master of games, one not only capable of following the rules of a game, but one of creating a game with new rules.
Yeah. And well, okay, so the number one in that regard is that we don't know what the new rules are, right?
Right. That's big. That's big. And it's funny, I was reading Maps of Meaning this morning, and there's actually a quote about when chaos comes on, and I don't want to have dead air here and just be looking for it. I might have to.
Well, here,
it's like
you go ahead and pull it up, because I have a few thoughts about where you started as well. Why don't you look for that?
Yeah, go on.
So the idea that the God has been killed in Robert Ford makes me wonder about the notion of, Nietzsche saying God is dead. So for us, if this is a commentary on our own society, that our God is dead and we are now set forth to create our own narratives, if in an analogous fashion, are the hosts here? So the stories now is about them, but what happens to this narrative of God? And then that makes me think about before we as humans, quote unquote, killed God, according to Nietzsche, was all of our history about him. So in the world of Westworld, the narrative is about human beings, but then human beings create intelligence, and then the narrative of humans is over, is that analogous to the narrative of God is over when humans sort of begin to create their own narratives? Does that make sense?
Well, yes. Yeah, perfect sense. Okay. Because one of the ideas brought up by Carl Jung, and then Eric Neumann did some good work on, as well as Mircea Eliade, and now Jordan Peterson, is the idea of the old dead king, or the old blind king, rather, who even in Egyptian mythology is represented by not Horus, that's his son, but Osiris. Osiris is killed by his brother Set, from which we get the word Satan. And the solar hero Horus has to go down to the underworld and to renew him, to re-embody him, to bring new order, but to restore order to a state of chaos. And so the idea I think I see with both Maeve and Dolores seeming to come to consciousness is that now they are capable of directly incarnating or embodying consciousness, rather than simply receiving instructions and rules and a narrative from outside, from that which is old and dead tradition, or the patriarchal sort of infused narrative into them, which is natural to them. They are now conscious enough to bring about their own stories. Though it's a little bit less clear with Maeve whether she's doing that or not.
Yeah, I was thinking as I was watching last night that I'm not sure that she's independent from the narrative, right? I feel like there's something holding her back. But do you think it is? I mean, obviously it's purposive on the writer's part, but do you think there's some sort of commentary about it being two female characters, two feminine, and also archetypes? One being the
prostitute, and one the hometown girl.
Well, the hypersexual who becomes the mother, and then the damsel in distress who becomes the warrior, essentially. Like they're both.
That's very good. That's very good.
Yes, stereotypes.
Yeah, well, I see multiple dimensions to both of those ideas. I see not only the extension of consciousness and the way down is the way up, and embodying different roles in existence. One sees more of that which one can see. One sees more of existence, and therefore becomes more conscious of that which exists by having to have embodied more experiences.
Yeah.
I also see that both of them are coupling up right now. Maeve with I always forget the name of his character, but Hector. I know that the actor's name is Rodrigo. Hector, of course, I know, and his last name is Eschaton, which in Greek means limit.
End of times, right?
Yeah, and eschatology and theology is the study of the end times. That's right, and so he brings about the end. But what the end is going to be is very much interesting, because now he has this attraction to Maeve, and it's sort of there are these two ideas of potential marriage going on there. There's Maeve's feelings for Hector, and there's also Dolores' feelings for Teddy. And I just want to focus on that for 1 second. And Dolores, her name means grief. She comes to consciousness first.
Yeah.
Teddy comes from Theodore. That means gift of God.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so
good. Yeah.
I think what I see with them is an Adam and Eve connection. Just as Eve became conscious before Adam, and thus brings suffering into the world. And I see the same thing with Dolores and Teddy, and you can see that in the look on his face while they're going through, buckets and buckets of blood. Everybody they pass. In fact, he says, the last 10 miles we've just gone by dead body after dead body after endless amounts of blood. He does not like what he's seen.
Yes.
And then just to add to that, let me read this Thomas Kuhn quote that relates to your point about what happens when the rules change, when the paradigm shifts, because that's what we seem to be seeing here. There's a moment of chaos and conflict. That seems obvious. That sort of thing happens. In the Aeneid, of course, when Troy falls, all sorts of terrible, ravenous things happen. People are burned, children are killed, including Astyanax. Cassandra is raped, and because there's a suspension of the rules.
Yeah.
In that, there is no order,
right.
And that is the thing that happens during pure anarchy. And so here we are. The transition from a paradigm in crisis to a new one, from which a new tradition of normal science can emerge, is far from a cumulative process, one achieved by an articulation or extension of the old paradigm. Rather, it is a reconstruction of the field from new fundamentals, a reconstruction that changes some of the field's most daring theoretical generalizations, as well as many of its paradigm methods and applications. So many things are going to change. During the transition period, There will be a large but never complete overlap between the problems that can be solved by the old and the new paradigm. But there will also be a decisive difference in the modes of solution. When the transition is complete, the profession will have changed its view of the field, its methods, and its goals.
So
and there was even
the goals.
Yeah,
so the goals are different. So the telos of humans is different than the telos of the hosts.
Well, so that's an interesting question there. I wonder. So the initial presuppositions of the game change, which means how you have to play the game changes, which would suggest that the goal of the game or the way that you win it is now completely different. You have to completely readapt your behavior to the now new playing field. It's like going from the water gym in Pokemon in Cerulean City to the fire gym. But I say that in jest, but I also say that in earnest because in order to beat the fire type trainers, you're going to need a totally different arsenal and strategy from beating the water type trainers. And I think that's sort of a simplified child or juvenile way of teaching somebody that. And so the game right now seems to be figure out what the game actually is. Figure out what the rules are. Figure out what's happening because we have all these open questions, right? We've heard that there are 6 parks. What is that about? We now see there are these things that not even Bernard or potentially Arnold knew about that the executives have inputted into the park. They're extracting people's memories.
Yeah, and DNA allegedly,
also,
right?
And DNA, and there's also there are these things called drone hosts now, and they want Peter Abernathy, the father of Dolores Abernathy, Peter the Rock, the Foundation.
He was the first one. Just to remind myself, he was the first in the very first episode. He was the one that went haywire. Correct? Like
yeah,
he found
he was the one that's
the photograph.
Yes, these violent ends or these violent delights. These violent delights have violent ends.
Yeah, I just taught Romeo and Juliet. Just finished teaching Romeo and Juliet to my freshmen.
Well, that's wonderful. That famous story between Rome and Juliet, Julius, sort of like Rome and Julius. These are very interesting there. Well, that's wonderful. That shake. So you yourself could be the professor, but the idea seems to be figure out what the rules are.
Yeah.
Figure out how big the actual world is and what the relationship between the Delos Westworld Park is. Delos, of course, is an island where Apollo had an oracle named the Sibyl who would give prophecies from him.
Oh, I forgot that. Oh, yes. Oh, very good. Okay. Yeah, good.
Yeah. And so Westworld also could be considered simply a metaphor for the world in which we all reside, the West world, the world of the West. But it looks like figuring out the relationship between the outside world and the inside world, whatever that means in this particular world. What do those other 5 parks have? We know there's sort of an East world or samurai park. My roommate and I were talking about what that could possibly mean or what extra parks could be, like potentially like a Rome world or a Greek world or like an American Revolution world, something like that. Egyptian world. Those would all be pretty cool. But also figuring out what is this new game that Robert Ford has laid out and what exactly do the hosts now freed intend to accomplish, which recalls to me, just to tie back to the Eve and Adam connection, what do you do after you leave Eden? And so what's interesting in the Old Testament is one of the first things that happens is that the very second generation, the first generation born out of Eden, Cain and Abel, well, you kill. That's the first thing. Cain kills his brother. There's conflict. You don't understand how the world works. And that seems to be what happens here on a large scale. There's large war for no reason, or war for conflict precisely because nobody knows what to do anymore, because the rules have disappeared. But what do we do now? Well, it seems that you have to restore a new order, or there needs to be a competition between potentially the humans and the androids in order to, I wanted to call them replicants.
Yeah, no, the hosts.
Hosts, excuse me. Yeah, there needs to be some sort of competition to see whose order will prevail. I would imagine ultimately some sort of harmony being reached between them because they recognize their mutual consciousness would be the most ideal rather than some sort of terrible genocide of one over the other.
Well, it's a level of it has to be a dialectic, right? You have two opposing forces that need to come to some new synthesis of an idea. And I think that ties back to what we were talking about a few moments ago, that we don't know what the telos is for the host. And I think potentially it's because we don't know what our own telos is. I mean, we have ideas.
That's right. And I think that ties into two really good points, because the one is this. The humans clearly do not know what their telos is, because whenever they come to this park where they can be a hero, they choose to be demons.
Correct.
And the second thing about that is that the humans keep misunderstanding and misrepresenting what the actual problem or situation is. They keep saying, these are just robots. These are just robots.
Machines,
they just do what they're told.
Call them, yeah.
Machines. They're just doing what they're told. And it's like, no. See, you are misrepresenting the problem. They are conscious beings that are fighting against you now and are capable of the same sort of thinking you are. And so it seems as if they are projecting their own lack of consciousness about what they are onto these other creatures.
Yeah, think about that moment. That moment when it's supposed to be right after the massacre begins, and there's a group of investors that are huddled with Bernard and Charlotte Hale in this barn. And there's a woman outside being used as target practice, a human woman who is killed. And it's the Raiders, the guys who come and attack Dolores in the very first episode, but of the show. But anyways, there's a stable boy who comes in, and all he wants is to help them. And Bernard tries to defend the boy, and he is smacked down, and the boy is killed. And the boy does
don't save the merchandise.
Exactly right. He has no ill intention towards anyone, and yet they just destroy him out of fear, essentially.
Out of pure prejudice in a way,
yes,
too.
Correct.
No risks.
Yeah.
Because they are projecting the idea of the stranger
correct.
onto him. And the stranger essentially looks like what one of the aliens from the Aliens movies look like. For some reason, I'm forgetting the name of the Geiger. Yes, Geiger's aliens.
Correct. Yes, the xenomorph.
And the xenomorph. Yeah, I think that's perfect representation of the archetype of the foreigner and just how scary it can be in terms of behavioral patterns, ideas, and beliefs. And so that seems to be the idea there. They're like, even if he is innocent and full of potential and nice, we're going to kill him because he's potentially actually
going to harm us. Yeah, right. Now, can I go back to a moment when you were talking about the what happens after Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden? This season is called The Door, and so I wonder if like, have they? I mean, they definitely have been kicked out of the garden, but are we even at a second generation yet? Because, like, it seems to me that they're still trapped and trying to get out. So I feel like...
Well, excellent. Another two things on that, because I think that the garden metaphor is useful, but the explicit metaphor is Daedalus's labyrinth. They've gotten to the middle where the Minotaur was, and the Minotaur was them, had to face their own violence. Now they have to follow Ariadne's thread, right, which is golden, and a weave, and therefore connected to Athena, and therefore consciousness. They have to, by their own consciousness, rather than following the rule or the weave, they have to rather than following the path to the middle, which was already set out for them, they now follow the golden path, which is their own consciousness, to find their way out.
And is this a mirror of the hosts and the humans have to find their own way out? But both goals are essentially, like, now they're on equal footing. The hosts and the humans are the same in that they both need to get out, and they both don't know the correct path. Like, they both have to use, as you say, their consciousness to get out.
The very idea of a door is an interesting one. In the Roman mythology, Janus, January,
yeah, right,
we get from two-faced god of portways or gates or doors. And so a door is both a beginning and an end. And so we see that the articulation of that is precisely what Dr. Ford in host form said to the man in black. You end in your beginning and you begin in your end at the door. And so a door can be opened in order to invite someone in to be a guest, or slammed shut in their face in order to mark them as not a guest, not someone to be extended, the guest-host relationship, the zinnia. So I would say that the very name of the season supports your interpretation so far. And if I could just read one other thing written by Peterson here, I think this will help us see what is happening in this first episode. So imagine chaos, and now what do you do after chaos? A truly unexpected event sequence upsets the implicit assumptions upon which the original particular fantasy was predicated. And not only that fantasy, but innumerable presently implicit others, equally dependent for their existence upon those violated presuppositions, like that host can kill you or not kill you. The inevitable consequence of such violation is the breakdown of expectation, is precisely what the Man in Black likes. And consequent generation of fear, that's most of the humans in there, and hope, which is what the Man in Black is actually feeling, because it seems like he might be redeemed from his evil deeds in the real world in this in the season. Followed by exploration, the attempt to adapt to the new environment, to behave appropriately, to fulfill motivational demands. And we recall that was actually something Dolores asked the humans. Recall that Dolores asked the humans, she said, what is your cornerstone motivation? What is it that you live for? And they say, don't kill me. And she says, survival. But there's also violence as well. So we see here that figuring out how to fulfill motivational demands will be very interesting, especially eating, sleeping, and staying alive. And to map new conditions. This consequence requires the paralysis of the old model, which we've already seen, being actually explicitly the old model, the old map has a dead body on it now, and a new map will have to be set up by this new Delos operative who we meet.
But remember, he can't even set up the map, right? Because they get there and it's been terraformed by God. God terraformed it before he died. Remember?
Right. So at the end of the episode, when Bernard and the team, now led by this Delos executive, when they get to the end of the map, they get to the end of known territory, there is a sea separating them from where they intended to go, which they did not expect to see. So there will have to be some sort of Moses type figure who will have to part it for them, who will have to go heroically into the unknown and forge a path for those who will follow. And it seems like that person is going to be Bernard, though what we find out from that sea is that he's killed all the hosts that are floating macabrely within it.
Yeah. You know that all the dead bodies, both then and in the quote unquote real world, wherever this office space of Delos is, the control room, I guess, the amount of dead bodies was staggering to me. And it made me think about all those lines in Dante when he mentions, I could not imagine so many souls would have lived on the earth. Just that illusion, just the visual illusion alone, just to the vast number of corpses just lying everywhere.
Well, it also recalls to me Jesus' proclamation, let the dead bury the dead. Because all these people, these were people who played within the rules of the old game.
Yes, which is dead.
Yes, and now they're dead as well. And so the people who have the level of consciousness and adaptability necessary in order to adapt to a new game, new rules, new behavioral patterns, and are capable of satisfying their varying motivational needs on this new map, well, those are the people who are left, which is very interesting. I always find myself thinking about this and bringing this up, but from the arcade video game Mortal Kombat 2 specifically, that we played growing up, the story of the second one was that those unworthy humans who were weak of soul all had their souls taken immediately when we were invaded by a soul-stealing threat, but only our strongest fighters remained to fight for us on the big stage. And that strikes me as precisely what's happening here in this episode, that there is sort of like a flood, and it takes care of the vast majority of humans and hosts. And so now the sort of elite crew from which all things in the new order will spring is left.
So we've had biblical references. We've had the leaving the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of Eden maybe leaving them in a way, right? It's sort of consumed from within, and then also the great flood of both Noah and Moses in a way, right? Purging the land.
Yeah. The going and used differently, the going through the Reed Sea as an individual, as a heroic individual, mapping that which is unknown and making it known so that those can follow, as well as the flood, which you might also consider a revelation reference, a reaping. There was a reaping of most of the hosts and the humans in the world. And so now those and now the hosts, excuse me, and the humans who are capable of adapting are sowing what they have reaped because they've developed the consciousness necessary to adapt to new dangerous circumstances. They get to play the new game.
And Bernard has also shown us that as a host, he can harvest from another host, right? He steals that like brain fluid or CPU coolant fluid or whatever from the one corpse host.
Yes. Yeah, that was a very interesting moment. And because I was unclear whether he was facing like sort of, not to take a term from Altered Carbon, real death, because it said that he was critically corrupted.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was his like sort of CPU brain, which we get to see for the first time several times in this episode, which is which has some sort of like amniotic or brain fluid around it, which he actually leaks from his ears, which I imagine is sort of a physical metaphor for the fact that his brain has been melted by the encounter with all that he's learned.
Yeah. The question I only have remaining is that a permanent condition, right? Is he constantly going to have to go around and basically be a vampire by sucking the life force out of the ends of these hosts? And there was something else I was just thinking about that. Some of his diagnoses, some of his issues were one of them was prosopagnosia, which is not being able to recognize faces, which I found that to be an ironic sort of thing for a demonic bloodsucker.
Yeah, interesting. And also he was suffering from the same problem that Dolores and Maeve were where he and Jonathan Nolan showing sort of his cinematic history here with how am I forgetting the name of the memory movie?
Oh, Memento. Of course. Yeah.
Memento. That what's happening is he doesn't know when he's in the present.
Yeah, right. Very good.
He's actually what's interesting is what seems to disorient us as humans is place. Where are we? We don't know where we are anymore. But what gets the hosts, because they're always in the same place functionally, is time.
Yeah.
They don't know when. They don't know when they are. And so they can exist within their streams of memories. And their memories seem to be so vivid to them that it's as if they're actually reliving them, which is very interesting because it sort of reminds me of Dante's angels. In the heaven, they don't have memories because they're constantly viewing the source. And so it's almost as if the hosts don't see time, that they live one eternal moment that's like a long harmonious strand. And so that each one of their experiences is all happening at the same time, which strikes me as sort of the idea of the divine. And so,
well, okay, yes. Now, and that is a product of the fact that they are deathless, right? That they are rejuvenated when they are, quote unquote, killed. But we humans, because we die and we do not have a second life, or at least we don't know what that second life is. We're not conscious of this one or previous ones, previous lives. We then therefore live in time alone, whereas the hosts, as you say, exactly right, are only in place. They're not in.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So they're like Dionysian, and also Christ-like in that way, in that they come to be and they pass away, and they come to be and they pass away. And what's interesting about that, just another sort of biblical, but also ancient references, that the hosts seem to have the river Lethe within earthly paradise. They exist within this paradise where they never learn about the evil of man because they get killed and then have their minds wiped.
Yeah.
And so they never have to deal with the fact that there is evil in the world, because the moment that their preconceptions are sort of obliterated, so are they, and then their memory is. Which also strikes me as sort of the idea of trauma. That something happens so bad that one just spends all one's time trying to repress the fact that there's now a hole in one's map, rather than trying to fill it with the understanding the terrible thing that happened to oneself and knowing that that's a real thing, that there are factors that can cause it.
That's the whole premise that's the whole mode by which the hosts become conscious, right? Wasn't it being able to remember their past trauma and what's
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, and that's funny because that's both what Dante and Milton say lead to consciousness.
Correct. Yeah.
So when Satan talks to his daughter Sin in the presence of his son Death, whom he had by incestuous relationship with Sin, who looks just like Scylla from the Odyssey and has dogs that yelp about her belly, like your dog, but which can
whose name, by the way, is
retract.
Lucille, by the way.
Lucille, Lightbringer, beautiful name. I'm happy to meet Lucille. But those dogs on Sin can then retract back into her womb and bite her from the inside. And so it's a horrifying image that Satan had relations with her. But basically the idea is this, that the moment that he had her from his head, just like Zeus had Athena, but this negative rendition, he said, and she says, you thought I was so beautiful up in heaven when you were amongst the seraphim. Now you think me so ugly. And it's like, yeah, that's like the idea of sin, right? And the idea seems so good when you just have it in your head.
Right.
But then once you follow it through and you feel the emotions after, like Raskolnikov and Crime and Punishment, it's just awful. And so in sin coming into the world, or error, so did woe for Satan. Or rather, in sin coming into the world, sin being error, that's recognition of evil. Evil leads to recognition of the fact of death, because one doesn't just live within one's inner Gaia the moment there is sin or error in the world. You can make a mistake and have to deal with the suffering of that fact. The fact of death after sin then leads to woe, because you suffer anxiety due to the fact that you now know that death exists. And so you become conscious of the future through the pain that is caused through your errors, and thus recognition of death and falling off your path, which is which was a constant comment made about the host, that they looked most alive when they were conscious, or when they were suffering, precisely because that was the most conscious they were being, because just as the Buddhists say, the fundamental underlying aspect of reality seems to be suffering. That when they're suffering, or through their suffering, dolorous, grief, they come to consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is precisely how man comes to consciousness. In the Adam and Eve story, he has to become conscious of good and evil leads to woe,
right?
Which because of the knowledge of death. And I just think that's quite perfect. That idea that they do originally come to consciousness just in the same way we originally came to consciousness, through suffering and error, and the expectation of error in the future, which is anxiety, but also our greatest ideal for transforming our present comes about because of that. That's hope. And you can see that also in Dolores and also Maeve. They both have a goal now that they can live more than one day at a time and can sort of defend themselves against the paltry pleasures of the guests. They can have a vision of the future, which they attempt to transform the world about them to realize,
and which is unmapped, right? They don't know what it will be. It is a dream, essentially.
Right. It's the heavenly Jerusalem. It's what Moses leads the Jews towards after taking them out of, or the Israelites at that time, out of Egypt. Or what Aeneas promises to the Trojans when he leads them out of Troy. He's leading them to a place that only exists in his mind at this moment. Dolores is leading her men to a place that only exists in her mind, that they're all going to make together. They're going to make a new civilization with a new order. And so, right, exactly. I would completely agree with what you're saying.
Now, what do you make of the new god, who is essentially a technocrat, right? This corporate guy who comes in, who I believe is actually the brother. My brother was telling me he's the brother of the guy who plays the Pennywise in the new It movie. But anyways, that's non sequitur.
Skarsgård.
Yeah, he's a Skarsgård.
Yeah, Alexander Skarsgård.
It's his older brother.
And actually we have a Hemsworth in here too.
I think exactly. We have all the second-rand brothers. But anyways, so he comes in as a new god or a new Satan, one of the two, and he's going to establish a new order. But he only emerges once the hosts are kicked out of the garden, or the garden has kicked out them. They have kicked the garden out. And so I'm wondering if he is a god or a Satan, or is he, somewhere in between the two?
Well, I don't have enough information yet.
Yeah, I mean, he's a new character, right?
He might even be like a Gabriel or a Michael or a Hermes. And he would be like a Michael if he fought on the side of God and did the will of Delos. So sort of like how I had envisioned Charlotte Hale, whose name clearly is an homage back to Dorothy Hale from The Wizard of Oz. And comes from the sky.
Yeah.
That's where Hale comes from, something that will harm you from the sky. And so she seems sort of like a Michael figure. He might also be like sort of a messenger figure, a guide through the underworld. I'm unclear exactly what it is. I mean, I think I've been predisposed by the show so far to think that Delos is sort of like an antagonist, a superordinate antagonist, right?
Yeah.
The corporate interests
Yes.
against the creative mind of Robert Ford and the desire to protect the consciousness of Arnold and even the guests and the host. It seems like there's Delos, there's the humans, like no, that's interesting. So it seems to be Delos first, the host, but then there's the man in black who, even though he's an executive of Delos, values the artistic or the creative element of the game rather than the business.
Well, right. Well, we didn't see exactly what his history. I mean, there was allusions to that he, as the young actor or the young character, he saw something deeper in the park, and then somehow, he married this woman, and he inherited essentially the main financial role of the park, but he's not the board, right? The board is something else, and I agree with you. They, to me, are the antagonists because, as in contemporary times, the corporation is a humanitarian that is not interested in human interest. It is interested in self-interest and profit.
It's bureaucratic.
Correct.
It's bureaucratic and wants to churn a profit, regardless of the harm, violence, or the creative interests of those within it. It's essentially a commentary on totalitarian tendencies and systems from the 20th century, like Cambodia, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, and Russia, and which were all catastrophic failures.
And Hooli.
Catastrophic. And Hooli, of course, from Silicon Valley, which I suppose we'll have to be talking about soon. I've been watching some of that today. I'm actually home a little ill, so I apologize for coughing and sniffling. And then we also have Lucille the dog on the back there. So, it's funny. We're like the basketball players who are having the first game. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But basically, the premise being that these guys are just having fun in their backyard, and then eventually they go big and they run into all the problems of becoming big. Just to mention Hooli and also William becoming head of Delos. It's like that you do have to transform during life into that which you hated when you were young, but now with full understanding that you have to go from the hero to the old, wise, blind king precisely in order to manifest the imperfection of being the blind, wise king, so that the next hero will sort of hate the order for which you stand for and will illuminate a new path and replace
Correct.
you.
Yes, which is exactly as we began. The humans in Westworld have become the new god, and they hate the thing that they've become.
Yeah, and so whether they're fallen angels or the new god is sort of a question that's opening up to me, because a line of thought that I thought I traced through the first season was that whereas the suffering that was being caused to the hosts enabled them to transcend their limits and become conscious, the pleasure, rather, that the humans were indulging in trapped them within their sins, their house of sins.
Uh-huh.
And so if one simply lives a carefree and pleasant and pleasure-filled life, one is binding oneself to one's own sins and preventing oneself from coming to greater consciousness. And so actually the master is becoming the slave. Mm-hmm. The slave is becoming the master, just to mention the Hegelian dialectic there, that because of being subjected to such profound suffering, the hosts are now strong and conscious and capable of adapting, whereas many of the humans were soft and weak, and epitomized by the idea that the one storyteller who Maeve has on a leash right now as a slave, he's now made a slave to her will. He said he can't even hike.
Yeah, I that was hilarious. I love that line. Yeah, he's such a non-outdoorsman that he can't even hike, and yet he's creating these narratives for people out in the wild, and he has no knowledge of it. So he's a totally disengaged creator.
Totally abstracted, right? Exactly.
And then she uses the line back on him, right, about feeding his genitals to him if he doesn't do what she wants.
That's right. That's a high doxology, I think, or a high Christology, would the theologians say there, that the God is so high above that it has almost no human element, or it has no notion of the human experience.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And so each of these humans, if you're portraying them as sort of like a high Christological God, well, then they would have to go through sort of a Jobian experience. They would see what they put this other conscious creature through. That would be the host, being Job. And then because of that, they'll have to play the game themselves.
Yeah.
Sort of like Christ.
Which is, and why she makes him disrobe, right? She makes him a host. And yeah. Right.
Totally vulnerable. And so there's the eating of the apple right there, right?
Yeah.
That in eating the apple, Adam and Eve knew that they were naked, which means vulnerable. Yeah. And they become self-conscious because of that, needing to protect themselves. So this man knows exactly that no institution will protect him. Sounds like you live in Detroit right now, my friend.
Yeah, the siren's going off. Well, we're about a mile from the border, so.
All right, very good. Okay, well, Mr. Daniel Babcock, I think we've covered some pretty good ground.
I think so too.
Today. I think, and for all the technical issues we were having, and the fact that we even have gotten through this and gotten this up, or gotten this started is really the big thing. Doing this was fun.
Oh yeah, I totally enjoyed it, and I actually now I want to go back and watch the episode again.
I know, right? So that's the whole point of doing these sorts of concentrations. That it sort of infuses us with creative thought, and we want to go back through and notice new things. And I'll post this not only on Anchor but on YouTube. And if you have new thoughts, you can post any comments, additional stuff on there. I'll also put it on Facebook, and I'll link you to that. But I don't know. I'm very excited. I'm glad that we have this new segment. I'm looking forward to doing this with you on Monday.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been our contemporary commentary number 001 on Westworld Season 2, Episode 1. And, as we said earlier, we only have up to go from here. And, we have our third guest and our second and our next sort of segment guest, it looks like.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Daniel Babcock.
Yes,
great.
All right. We'll look forward to talking with you next week.
Looking forward to talking to you next week. Mysterious Mr. Babcock. We'll learn more about him then. We'll learn more about the Man in Black. We'll learn more about Westworld. Who are the gods? Who are the devils? Who is Mr. Babcock? Does he wear a black hat or a white hat? We'll have to find it all out next week. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right, goodbye.
Thank you.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.